Hi, welcome to Vicky Makes and Builds. Okay, so this is the video that I mentioned in my last video on the wildlife puzzle, the last section that I did on the big 33,000 piece puzzle. And I mentioned in that I was going to do a separate video all about taping and how I tape my large puzzles. Now, one or two people have shown an interest in this, either in comments or just asking me what kind of tape I use and how I go about doing it and things like that. So I thought I would just do it in a separate video and go through my process with you on the last section that I just did of wildlife. And yeah, just give you some hints and tips and some things that hopefully might help you if you ever decide to do it yourself. So I hope you enjoy. I do have my previous sections out so I can show you how I've done it on the previous ones. So first of all, I guess really, if you're going to do this, what you need to decide is how you're going to store it or what you're going to do with it, basically. So if you just want to store it until you can hang it, it's really just a case of figuring out where you're going to store it and if the sections are the right size for the box. Mine, I basically just split it using the natural splits in the puzzle. So there are, in the height of a section, there are 84 pieces. So height-wise, there's 4 rows and there are 21 pieces height-wise in each row. Width-wise, it's 40 pieces wide, so I just do 20 pieces width. So in total, there's 8 sections in total for the whole section. And this is what those sections look like. It's hard to tell because it's not really contrasted against a light background, but they're just tall and thin, basically. Now, another good thing about splitting this particular puzzle is that the natural breaks in the puzzle are actually obvious because they're different shaped pieces along the rows. So it makes it easier to actually divide this particular puzzle, and perhaps other edukits where there's a repeat cut pattern like that. But really, all you need to do is just know how big you want the sections so you can store them where you want to store them. At the moment, I can't store them in my wooden box that wildlife came in because it still has bags of pieces in it. So I am storing them inside my entering the bedroom educa box, which also has entering the bedroom in it. So it's getting a little bit full now, but I do have another 6,000 piece puzzle box that I can use to stack a few of the sections on. But I do plan to mount this one day when I live in a house that's big enough to house it. I could probably put it up in here, it would have to go around a corner, and I'm undecided on that. But anyway, that's beside the point. I've made these sections this size so that height-wise they are 21 and width-wise they're 20. So what you then need to do, I'll move these out of the way because they're just in the way, I just put them there to show you. So what you then need to do is start counting the rows and the columns and separating your puzzle so that you can start to flip. So I'm going to start counting just now and I'm going to separate the sections. I'll just start with like 1. I count along, so let's say I'm going to do the height first. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. And just as I said, it ends on that big natural kind of split in the puzzle where it's different shaped pieces. So I'm going to take the row above it and I'm going to start taking pieces out just one at a time, going the length of the puzzle, the whole width I should say, and just put them together in a big row on top of the next section up so I don't get it mixed up and accidentally attach it to this section. That would make it 22 pieces high. So I'm just going to do this slowly for this bit, and then I will speed up the process and repeat for the other sections. You have to be careful when you take them out. Educ is quite a loose fit generally, so they're not too difficult to take out, but sometimes when they're embedded in the middle of the puzzle it can be quite difficult to pry them out without peeling the image off or something. So just be sort of gentle and keep it in the row because that makes it easier to attach back onto its section rather than just kind of chucking them side by side. And I would say do one at a time rather than trying to kind of one piece at a time rather than trying to kind of put your hand under the puzzle and lift it up and try and bring it away in a big section. That can just lead to damaging the puzzle or you know, making it crumble, especially with edgy because they're so crumbly, the pieces. So that's one full width taken out. So I'm going to move this down a little bit. So all I now have to do with this bit is cut it in half widthways, just doing the same thing. So for this little row here, I'm going to just move this along and just slot it back on to its section. And it's nice and easy because all the pieces are together. You just run your thumb along and that's it, reunited with its own bit. So now with this one, as I said, it's 20 wide. Sorry, it's 40 wide, so you just count along 20. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And then you just take the next one after, row 21, I guess, and put it, sorry, I've done it the wrong way. Put it on top of that section that it belongs to, so you don't end up with a section that's one piece too wide and one that's one piece too short. And again, just one piece by one piece, take it out like a snake, attach it to the row, or column in this case, and just being careful not to yank them up and bend any prongs or peel any image off. Of course, with this puzzle, sometimes you'll hit one of those pieces where it just sort of rests against the other piece, one of the little groove pieces. That's slightly annoying, but I haven't so far. Right, so now this section is a complete section that I will tape. This section needs this one putting back on, and you just slide it along and just drop it in place like that. And now these are ready to be taped. So what I will do is, before I start taping them, I'm going to just separate the whole thing out. So I'm going to time lapse this bit and just make it a little bit faster for you. Right, so that's all of the sections split, and because this one I'm able to divide equally by, you know, either 4 in that case or 2 in that case, they all should be the exact same size. So what I would say is, you know, in this case, if all the sections are the same size, use the other sections as like a guide to make sure you've got the width right and the height right, so you can clearly see they're all sort of equal. The reason I say that is because it's easy to miscount, and it's easy, especially with big puzzles, and it's easy to, like, one thing that I think I do sometimes, and an example of this is my Disney Museum puzzle. When I divided that and taped it, my intent was to put the sections in the original box that it came in. Then when I came to actually put it in, not all the sections were the right size, and a couple of them were just slightly too big. And I'd obviously miscounted, or the other thing I probably did was, when I was taking the row of pieces out, like this, to actually divide the puzzle, I obviously attached them back onto the wrong side, so they ended up with one smaller section and one bigger. So just make sure when you do take a row out, either that way or that way, that you're actually placing it back onto the correct section, so you don't end up with sections bigger and some sections smaller, because that can, if it's a close fit in the box you're using, then that can end up meaning that they don't quite fit properly, and then you get the edges kind of bending up, and it's a little bit, that's not very good really. So yeah, I sort of learnt my lesson from that one, and that's why when I do take the row out, whichever section it's come off, that's the section I rest it on. It might not matter too much if your box is really big, or wherever you're storing it is really big, in which case they could be all different sizes, I suppose, but for me, I think it's better if you can have a bit of uniformity in the section sizes, as much as possible anyway. Sometimes they don't divide that equally into 3 or 2 or whatever, and you maybe need a narrow bit at one end. That's fine too, as long as you've worked it out and you stick with it. But like a tip for me would be to either count it twice and make sure you've definitely got it right, and then once you've divided the sections, make sure they're right and you haven't accidentally put a row on the wrong section. So these sections are ready to be taped now. So basically, I really just need to show you how I flip and tape them. So the things you'll need for this are, you'll need some tape. Now, the tape I use is this blue painter's tape. Some people call it painter's tape. This is called multi-surface masking tape. We do call it masking tape here in the UK. And I use this blue stuff because it's a little bit stronger than the white stuff and it sticks to the puzzle better, in my opinion. And I get the wide stuff. You can get thinner painter's tape where it's about half the width of this, but I use the wide stuff because then it covers more of the back of the puzzle and you're not using it up quite so quickly. And the brand I get is Scotch. Scotch Blue Multi-Surface Masking Tape. So that's it. And that's what I use to tape the puzzle. So you'll need plenty of that. I've got a little bit of a roll left, but that won't cover this puzzle, so I've had to buy a new one. You also need some scissors so that your lines are straight. You could rip it. It's rippable, the tape, but it comes out in a big wonky bendy line and just doesn't really work. So you'll need scissors. And the other thing you need for flipping the puzzle specifically is 2 pieces of foam board. Now, probably it would be easier for me if these pieces of foam board were smaller. And what I might do, because this foam board's seen better days, this has got some cat scratches on it and things like that. So what I might end up doing with this old foam board is cutting it in half, because it's actually easier. The foam board has to cover the section, but it's actually easier if it's smaller because then you have better control over the flip. But I'm not cutting this just yet because I don't have any replacement foam board, so I want to keep these the size they are. But eventually I will get some new foam board and just use this for flipping and cut what I want. But anyway, you can buy it in different sizes, so if you happen to have foam board that's smaller and still fits your section, that's fine too. So that's what you need: 2 bits foam board, tape, scissors. And I will attempt now to show you how I flip the puzzle. Right, so this is tricky because I've got my board out and it doesn't give me a lot of room around the puzzle, which is probably where slightly smaller pieces of foam board comes in handy. I'm going to attempt to move this piece onto the foam board. So the only way I know to do it is to slide it on. And the reason for that is because you take a risk doing little puzzle pickups, and especially with Educas when they would just disintegrate and you would have to build the section again. So I slide it on. Now you have to have a steady hand and you have to try and line up the foam board as closely as possible with the top of the puzzle. Now this is the bit that always makes me nervous. I have a hand on this bottom side and I press it up against the board. Not so hard that it's going to flip up, but hard enough that it's not going to drop or lift up as I'm moving it across. So I basically just get the section, slide it from the table onto the board as fast as I can without destroying it, and then that's it on the board. I'll turn it that way. So there's plenty of overlap around the puzzle, and again I will say that's a good thing. Smaller bits of foam board are easier to handle, but if there's plenty of overlap, it's got further to go before it falls off. So that's good. So what I need to do now is basically sandwich it between the foam boards. So put another one on top, make sure it's in the middle. And then I put one hand underneath in the middle. You can see there, underneath. I've got my camera lady helping me today, Freya's helping me. And then I put one hand on the top and I press it down so that that section of the puzzle is not going to go anywhere. Then, quickly, I flip it as quickly as I can. You can't do it slowly because it could slide out, and I have had disasters with this before. And I would say as well, only do one section at a time. I'll explain that in a wee second. But anyway, I'm ready to flip. I've pressed down in the middle, it's stuck in there, and go. You lower it down, you lift it up, and there you have a flipped section. And I will basically do that with every section until they're all flipped. So my story about the disaster I had, basically I was flipping the sections of the Anatolian 360 World Puzzle, and they were much smaller sections, and I was getting impatient because flipping and taping puzzles can be quite a boring process, and I was getting impatient and I decided to try flipping 4 sections at a time, and unfortunately that was just too many. They were too close to the edge of the cardboard. I didn't have a good enough grip on it, and 2 of the sections basically fell out. And so I had to rebuild them, and it wasn't quite from scratch, but they were quite well destroyed, so I had to rebuild them, and I learned my lesson from that, and I never did that again. So even if you've got millions of little sections that you have to do and you get really bored with it, only do one section at a time, because you'll be really, really upset if you end up dropping a few sections and then have to rebuild them. So yes, that's my warning on that one. So now basically, so I'll use the same technique for all of these sections in terms of flipping, but because I've got one on the board here already, I'm not gonna, then take it off and then flip another section, then take it off and then flip another. I'm just gonna tape this, then move on to the next one. Flip, tape, flip, tape, flip, tape, and so on. So before I tape, and this is something I learned from taping the Disney Orchestra puzzle. That was the first big puzzle I ever taped, first puzzle at all I ever taped. And what I find with that puzzle is when I come to put it together, some of the sections feel just slightly bigger in terms of how far apart the pieces are. So because Educa's quite loose fitting, there's a little bit of movement in the pieces. So like, if I can just do it with one hand, if you sort of push the pieces apart and push them together, there's movement. So if I taped this with the pieces like as far apart as they can go, so to sort of stretch to its maximum, but then I do the next section, the one beside this one, and they're as close as they can go, you get this ever so slight discrepancy with how it lines up. And when you come to actually put it together again, you can get little bends in the puzzle and things like that. And that does happen just a wee bit with my Disney Orchestra puzzle. It's not enough to, ruin the whole effect or anything, but it's there, and it's quite frustrating when I'm putting it together. So this is something that I do, and I'm going to flip back to the other camera. I just rub my hands from the outside in, just to make sure the section is as close together as it can be. Now, do this lightly. Do it enough to actually move the pieces, but don't press down and really shove them together, because I've done that before as well. And what happens is you get like a fold and the pieces come up in the middle and it breaks. So now, as far as the taping goes, this roll I've started, and it's got a jagged edge, so I've obviously used this for something else at some point. So I'm just going to cut the edge off. It's also got a fold in it. So I'm just going to cut that off so it's nice and flat. And the way I do it is I get a piece off roughly to the size I think it is, or slightly bigger, and I just kind of hover it over. I go up as close to the straight edge as I can, because there's not going to be any overlap on the prongs, and then I go up as far as like the insert, the in on the opposite side, because you don't want it longer than that, because then you get little bits of blue sticking out, and again it becomes harder to put together. So I just sort of measure it, kind of eyeball it like that, and I put my thumb roughly where I want to cut it. Then I stick one end just to the table, just to keep it kind of stretched. I do a little snip, and then I sort of adjust my hold so that it doesn't drop when I've cut it. So if it falls on the foam board, it's going to end up ripping the foam board. And then I have a piece the right length, and I just line it up. Try and keep it as parallel as possible, because you don't want to end up at the bottom and have like it at a weird angle like that. Try and keep it as lined up as possible. Don't go over the edge of the in on the side, and just flatten it out a few times as best you can. And then I do the same thing for the next one down. Just kind of try and get the length, mark it with your thumb, put the opposite side, stick it to something so that it doesn't flop about, little cut, grab it so it doesn't drop, and then when I put the next bit on, I always overlap it slightly. I don't leave a gap, because that would just kind of make it loose and bendy. I overlap it maybe by about 1/2 centimetre or something, or just 5mm, whatever. I don't know what measurement you used. I don't know what that is in inches, fraction of an inch. And then so I overlap it slightly, and again trying to keep it as parallel as I can. You can use the lines of the puzzle to do that, unless it's a random cut, I suppose, or you can use the previous tape to try and line it up as best you can, and then you just flatten it out, and you just keep going down doing that until you reach the bottom. So see, now it's a tiny wee bit at the bottom, but if I go right to the bottom there'll be a gap, so I'm going to have to use an extra piece and overlap it quite a lot here. But that's okay, it's not, you know, the end of the world. I'd much rather not lose the pieces, so I'll just use the extra bit of tape. Again, being careful not to overshoot the ends on the bottom, these ones. And so that is the taping done horizontally. Now, I know some people, they will now do the same thing that way, all the way across, vertically, and that would definitely give it some strength. I definitely don't have the patience for that, and so what I do is I just put a vertical piece at one side and I put a vertical piece at the other side, and that helps just keep it kind of square and straight. I have in the past done it diagonally as well, like a cross, and there's no doubt it would give it a bit of strength doing one that way as well, but it just costs you a fortune in tape. And I don't feel like it's necessary, personally. You know, they don't crumble apart, they've got enough tape on them, in my opinion, and I've just put a bit at each edge just to bolster it a little bit. And that's enough for me. Personal preference, really, I suppose. But you just do the same thing, measure out your length. Now that's just a wee bit long, so I'm just going to pull that up a tiny bit and cut a little bit off the end. And then try not to get any bubbles or folds in it. Keep it as flat as you can. Just palm your hand and do the same on the other side. Swing your thumb as close to the edge as possible without overshooting the section. Flat as possible. Push the bubbles out as much as you can. Now you can, you know, there is like, it sticks to itself quite well. So you can, you know, if there is a wee bit of a bubble, you can peel it back a bit and then just readjust. You can't do that as well when it's on the cardboard, because you will end up taking some of the cardboard off, and you may just need to use another bit of tape, so it won't be as sticky. But when it's stuck to itself, the tape will peel off a bit and you can adjust. But anyway, that is a completed taped section as far as I'm concerned. And all I do then is just turn it over. Be gentle with it, don't let it just flop about, you know, because the pieces will bend and you can lose pieces like that. So maybe just use both hands, try and keep it as flat as you can. Put it to one side and do the next one. Just using the same method as I did before, piece of foam board, slide it off. Now I have to do it at this end because I don't have enough space between my board and my puzzle shelf to actually fit it in. So I have to do it at this bottom end, and I just gently slide it on. Try not to press down on the board. Sometimes a piece will come out and shift underneath the section, which it has in this case. And it's these annoying ones with the little grooves where they're not attached as well. And I can see where they are because there's a little bump formed here. So I've got to do a little bit of adjusting to get those back. That's that bit back in, and then there's a wee bit here that came out as I was sliding it on. So I'd say that's the riskiest bit really when you're doing the slide onto the foam board method. That's the riskiest bit, even more than the flipping, because you've got to make sure you're not applying too much pressure to the edge of your board or table so it doesn't flip up or drop down. You've got to make sure you don't catch it with your leg or anything like that, and you've got to make sure you there isn't too much of a drop when it lands on the board, because then you can get pieces falling out like that. I mean, if it's just one or two, it's easily fixed, But if it ended up being the whole thing, then that would be disastrous. But that's the second section on, 2 of 8. And so I just repeat, rinse and repeat. In the middle of the board, hands in the middle so that they are planted on the puzzle and pressing on the puzzle, and it's not going anywhere. It's a good closed sandwich, puzzle sandwich, and then just, and that's how I do it. Remember, pushing the pieces in a little bit so that you're making it as like small as possible and not stretched out, so it's in keeping with the other section and it will go together better at the end of it all. And then I will turn it this way as I'm going to do the long bits first, and I'll continue taping. Right, so that's it. That is how I go about taping my large piece count puzzles. Now, just to reiterate, that's just my way of doing it. I'm sure there are different ways that it can be done. There's different types of tape and things you can use, and there perhaps is even better ways to flip the sections so you can tape the back of them. That is the one part of this whole thing that I find the most hair-raising, if you will, because there's always risk involved in trying to flip the section. Now, the only 2 ways I've ever known to do it are to either slide it onto a board like I had to do with this one, or to just do a very quick pick up on the section and flip and put it down. They're obviously risky and not the most safe ways of doing it, but they're the only 2 I know of. So if anybody out there has done this before and knows a better way, or a more safe way of doing it perhaps, or if anybody even knows of a tool like a puzzle spatula or something that you can use to just flip the puzzle section like a pancake or something, that'd be really good, but I don't know of them if they do exist. So do leave a comment if you have any advice on this, or if your experience of taping the back of large puzzles is any kind of different and perhaps better. Do let me know. But this is the way I do it. So I do hope that some of my hints and tips have been helpful for you. These are just things I've learned along the way. I've taped a few large puzzles now, and I've come across different things, you know, that I've incorporated each time just to make the process slightly better. And on that note, actually, I'm going to put a wee list of hints and tips in the description below, just as a reference, so you can remember some of the things I mentioned, like, you know, making sure all the pieces are kind of pushed together, and making sure you put the line of pieces that you take out back onto the correct section, things like that, little hints and tips that I've learned along the way. I'm going to put a list in the description for you in case you ever want to have a look at that if you're going to tape your own puzzle. So aside from that, I don't really have anything else to say on this particular subject. Like I said, if you have any more questions, please do feel free to leave a comment and I'll try and answer as best I can. But in the meantime, I would like to wish you all happy puzzling, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!